Montana.
Now, back to Steiny and Guru on 95.7 The Game.
All right, welcome back. Matt Stein, Matt Darrell, the Guru Johnson with you. And let's welcome in Eric Crocker of the Locked On 49ers podcast. He's a former cornerback. He spent some time in the Jets camp. Eric, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard this, but Jimmy Garoppolo was on with Sports Illustrated on their podcast, and he was asked about Trey Lance and the 49ers. It's about a half a minute. I just want you to take a listen, and because I want to ask you about it. Take a listen.
What did you make of the Trey Lance trade to Dallas?
Weird situation. Been a lot of weird situations over there in San Francisco, just to leave it at that. But, I'm happy Trey got another shot, man.
How do you think San Francisco's handled those quarterback situations?
How do you think they've handled them?
I think it's been messy. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it.
All right, what do you make of Jimmy Garoppolo's comments there, Eric?
Well, first, I think for Jimmy Garoppolo, a guy who was the face of a 49ers organization for several years, I feel like that's the most I've ever heard him talk. So that was the first part. And then hear him kind of laugh at a joke was really a great response. I don't think that they've handled it very well. Now, at the end of the day, I think the way the 49ers have gotten to the point where Brock Purdy is a starting quarterback, they're in a great position now. At least that's how it feels to start the season. But the way that they got there was very unorthodox, and they might be one of the few organizations that would have gotten to that point the way that they did, trading all that they did up to get Trey Lance, take over for a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo, who had went to multiple, NFC championship games and a Super Bowl for the 49ers, and then say, even though you've done very well for us, Jimmy, we're actually going to play this other guy. And then we're going to bring you back just to back him up, even though you haven't really done anything to become a backup in his league. And then we're going to ship you off and let you go to Las Vegas. So I think he's probably looking at it like it's very weird. I think a lot of people that were very high on Jimmy Garoppolo and appreciated his wins that he had with the 49ers, they think it's weird. But ultimately, the 49ers feel like they're in a good spot now with Brock Purdy.
Yeah, no doubt, Eric. I told my partner I have the Niners at least in the NFC Championship game. That's how, high a regard I hold them in. But if I were to ask you, what's the biggest question mark for you facing this team entering Week 1 in Pittsburgh, how would you answer that?
Who is going to block T.J. Watt? Who's going to stop him from getting to the quarterback? That's a guy who is a game changer. He disrupts things. I think I saw one of the seasons he had like 8 forced fumbles on the quarterback. This is a guy who gets after the quarterback consistently, former Defensive Player of the Year. I know everybody, in the Bay Area, especially the South Bay, they know how good Nick Bosa is. I would probably say, guess that the people up in Pittsburgh think that T.J. Watt is as good, if not better. So game changer there is a Colt McKivitz, who's going to have to stop him from getting to the quarterback. I think that's a difficult task, and I think he's someone who can kind of make life miserable for the 49ers and their offense.
Eric Crocker joining us on 95.7 The Game. He's the host of the Locked On the 49ers podcast. I got to ask you about the Trey Lance trade, and I know there's a lot of different avenues we can go down. I'll just throw something at you that I thought of yesterday, and that is, to me, the 49ers don't believe that Trey Lance will ever be any good, because otherwise they would not have traded him to the Dallas Cowboys. What would you say to that?
I think for them, it's whoever gave them the best draft capital. Whether they believe he'll be good or not, which maybe they lean more towards that, it's the Cowboys gave them the most. So they were willing to move off of Trey Lance for a 4th-round pick. It sounded like the other offers that were coming in were closer to 6th or 5th-round picks, which is kind of what I thought they would get for him, a guy with obviously very limited playing experience over several years. So, if I'm a team like, you gave up, or used 3 first-round picks on him, but that has nothing to do with us. Right now, we're telling you his value is closer to a late day 3 pick, and I would have agreed with that.
Eric, I can recognize Kyle Shanahan's brilliance, but I tell my partner, for me, I want to see him get it done. I want to see his team finish. And you played in the league. You know what it's about. Is there anything to see here with Bosa not being with his teammates in preseason? Because, Eric, I told my partner, and I don't play, but it's bothering me that he's not there. Anything to see here?
I think everybody in the building, especially the players, understand just the business aspect of it. And once he gets his money, everybody will love him, right? He'll be there. He'll show up. He'll beat Nick Bosa, and nobody will have any issues. When I was with the Jets, I did experience something similar to this. It was Darrelle Revis. He was holding out to start everything up, and then he also was recovering from a torn ACL, so that was kind of his excuse to do rehab somewhere else. Ultimately, he ended up showing up, and about a week later, he was traded to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, but just seeing how everybody received him when he did show back up after missing, several times in the offseason, nobody cared. The players don't care. They understand it's a business. So I think for Nick Bosa, his coaches want to get this done as soon as possible. The players probably want him to as well, but they all know that at some point they might, come to a situation where they need to get paid. And I think we saw Fred Warner when he got a sack, he did the shrug and then kind of did this making it rain thing, like, hey, man, you guys need to pay Nick Bosa. So they understand what's going on, and the players, they definitely won't fault Nick Bosa at all.
Eric Crocker joining us from the Locked On 49ers podcast. So, it's Kyle Shanahan's 7th year, and I was just kind of thinking about this for a sec. Has he put himself in a tough position in terms of he got Garoppolo, okay, and they had him for a little bit. And then they went and they drafted Trey Lance, and he had a crack at Brady, apparently, but didn't want him. And here we are in year 7. And this is what kind of hit me, Eric. The 49ers are going to go into this season as a Super Bowl contending team with Brock Purdy, who was the last pick in 2 years ago in the draft, and played 8 regular season games, and Sam Darnold, who's already been in the league 5 years and has done, has struggled, hasn't had success. Like, that's where we're at after 7 years of Shanahan. Has he put some pressure on himself?
Well, I think the first thing that you said was, they do have the expectation to go really far, potentially be an NFC Championship caliber team or Super Bowl caliber team. I think the odds say that they're one of the better teams in the league. So I think we should kind of view him from that standpoint, where it's like, hey, this is a guy who, regardless of how he's going about building this quarterback position, he's done a terrific job between him and, John Lynch, building a contending roster that can withstand maybe inconsistent play at the quarterback position, or a cast off like Sam Darnold, or the last pick in the draft with Brock Purdy. Because I think even if you watch the preseason game and you see, what Brock Purdy has done well so far, he's had 3 drives. They've all gone, within the 10. There's been a lot of heavy lifting from guys like Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk with the yards after catch and things like that. So the picks outside of how they've handled the quarterback situation, I think, make this situation a little easier, especially on a guy that's the last pick in the draft.
Eric, let me ask you this, because you're a DB. I believe you had 26 career interceptions. What's your verdict on Brock Purdy? Mine and my partner, we need to see more. Where is he the real deal to you, or you need to see more?
I always err on the caution of seeing more. I think it's wild that people rush the judgment on a guy like Trey Lance, who has started in 4 games, didn't even finish one of them, and now all of a sudden he's a bust. But then, with a guy that only has like 8 starts or played in 8 games, it's like, oh man, he's just amazing, and he's the future franchise quarterback. We've seen a lot of situations where guys have either started out poorly and then ended up being great, or guys who have started out great and ended up being average to below average. So I think Brock Purdy does a lot of things very well. Again, I think the position he's in with his team sets him up for a certain level of success, but I definitely have to see, hey, how consistent is he? And there were some things that I felt like last year kind of got in trouble a little bit with some of the throws, and he's starting to figure out what he can and can't do. But as he's figuring those things out, I think the NFL is as well. So I don't want to be one of those guys that's like, oh, wait till everybody gets the tape on him. You hear that a lot.
Right, yeah.
He also has Kyle Shanahan, who's looking at the tape, and he's going to put him in very good positions. But just in the sense of what he does, to where, maybe he's a little uncomfortable doing certain things or throwing to certain areas of the field. And do teams try to force him into those areas in key moments? And that's what's to look for. So if he passes that test, then definitely have 0 issues with him being the starting quarterback. But I'd say that I'm going to hold off on saying, oh man, he's just a great long-term quarterback. Let's see this year, see how it plays out, and hopefully he continues to do what we saw him do in the 8 games that he played in last season.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm asking, Eric, because that's that's kind of what I've thrown out to 49er fans. I mean, do you expect Brock Purdy to be better, maybe to be not as good, or to be about the same as he was a year ago? I know he was undefeated, but the eye test is going to be the test. And is it fair to ask that question?
Oh, man, I think there's – okay, we watched Jimmy Garoppolo, right?
Yeah.
And even though we could tell that there's clearly some limitations or areas where he's not as great throwing the ball, he still was highly efficient, and the 49ers won a lot of games with him.
Right.
And I expect something very similar from Brock Purdy. Now, again, I think there are, people talk about arm strength and things like that. I think there are some things where even Jimmy throwing the ball does a little bit better than Brock. I think for Brock, I think he's better at clearly making plays than being a playmaker than what we saw from Jimmy Garoppolo. So the throwing the ball part, being able to drive throws in certain areas of the field, if we see a tick down in that or some of the interceptable balls that he threw, if those get caught, and again, they didn't last year, so you can't knock them on that. 49ers won those games. But if they do get caught, what does that start to look like, right? If the efficiency drops off just a little bit, then what? So, if maybe some guys are hurt, like the George Kittles or Christian McCaffrey, who I felt like they relied on heavily, like, then what? So those are all tests, again, that Brock Purdy is going to have to pass. And if he passes those, then I don't think we have any of these kind of conversations. It's like, all right, this is baby Drew Brees, right? As we heard from, Willie Snead, who said, man, he has a lot of Drew Brees attributes, but he's going to have to go out there and show it this year. And if he does, then 49ers will be in a great spot, especially with the cap, having a guy for 2 more years on this type of salary.
Yeah. Hey, Eric, thank you very much. Really good stuff. Appreciate your perspective, man.
All right. Thanks for having me on, guys.